I thought we'd try something new a little bit today. So I'll be sharing my screen. I'd like to do a little bit of a case study on the Outlaws on Dorado here against the Shock.
Ooh.
This isn't to say we have to play this composition, but I think it'd be really fun for us to whip up this double bubble variant, bringing in the ball instead of the monkey.
Yes.
I know, Louis, you've got a nuts ball ready to go.
Absolutely. Love
Did
it.
I guess Jake impression?
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
Jake
hey.
Overwatch, support all-star.
I used to play
Yes.
Brig and still play Brig and Comp.
Yeah, Blank's on Brig, and I'll be on the sideline this time.
I don't know why my pen tool isn't working, but that's okay. We'll get by
I
with no
can
pen
alt
tool.
track.
Stasis, I fucking hate Dorado, so if you want to play Ashe on this map with this comp, I'm down.
No, he's playing Genji.
If I'm playing, yeah.
Oh,
You
okay,
gotta play
okay.
Ashe, buddy.
So
Because
I'd
even
like
if
to-
I'm not playing Genji, I'll probably be on Tracer.
Oh yeah, I'd like to play this comp exactly. Actually, Ashe Tracer, Ball, Zarya, Brig, Zen on defense, and then offense. I want to do like an extremely fast rush dive comp
Okay.
with like
Oh man.
Genji plus
Genji
Tracer
Korea.
maybe, or even like
Korea.
you can just like run at them with Korea, or even Genji Reaper might be interesting. But
Oh man, no, this is
Before-
my language.
before we talk about offense, let's go over our defense. And if you guys watched this match when it was live, you might already know that it gets stopped at first point, so there's not a whole lot to look at. But by far, first point is probably the most interesting point in Dorado. So let's whip up some stuff for here. So looking at what Houston's running here, just on paper, who can point out some of the differences that this comp has to the standard double bubble? And obviously the big changes being Winston to Ball and Ana to Zen. What are some sort of stylistic changes that need to happen to make this variant work?
It's a lot faster, I think. Like the pace of it is generally a lot faster because you're playing for damage.
You're
Primarily-
you're playing for Ball Tracer Discords.
Yeah,
Yes,
basically,
yeah.
you're discording target, just dive in.
So can you, this might be a bit hard to, but can you elaborate on what you mean by faster?
Can I say?
Yeah, go for it.
You're playing off short burst of damage. You're essentially relying a lot off cooldowns, essentially, because you're waiting for like Ball and Tracer and like Ashe Dynamite Discord to all kind of go in at once.
Mhm.
But you don't really have a lot of sustain, so it's like you get in fast, try get kill, get out, and then the cycle repeats.
Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I really wish my pen tool will start working. Let me try one more time. Hooray! Okay. So let's use yellow. Yeah, yellow shows up well. So if we imagine normal double bubble, DB, as like a sort of sine wave of uptime, whenever we use our cooldowns, we have strong uptime, and then we need to wait for our cooldowns to come back. Then our cooldowns are back up, we can go in, we need to wait for our cooldowns to get back. And we have high peaks of value over time, but they're mitigated by long downtimes where we don't have bubbles, we don't have good positioning with our Winston, we need to set up for our next dive, where we can't really do much, we don't have a lot of reach. Compare that to the Ball variant, BV, it's not as high peaks, but they're way more frequent. And since we're not as reliant on cooldowns, like obviously we're still reliant on blinks and Ball's grapple and stuff like that, but it's a much faster frequency with lower peaks, meaning we don't have the same hard dive potential. We don't have like Nano Winston with Primal to hard engage, but we have a lot more frequency in our attacks, meaning our neutral game is going to be stronger and we're going to be able to execute things faster. So by faster, I don't mean we're going into their spawn door right off the gate and we're going as fast as possible, but it means when we see opportunities, more often than not, we'll be able to capitalize on them because more often than not, we'll be at these uptime moments. They happen more often, if that makes sense. And if you guys are not taking math classes, these graphs probably mean nothing to you, but this sort of frequency wave that we're looking for means we have a lot more flexibility without as much hard committal. So, one thing I really want to highlight in this defense is that Houston plays this extremely well in the way that they play their neutral game. They don't hard commit any time because they're mainly playing for neutral, and then as soon as they find an advantage, it's like a snap decision making, usually just between Tracer and Ball about when they're committing. So for Louis and for Stasis, I want you guys to keep close eyes on your counterparts about when they're using their cooldowns to commit, notably when Ball's slamming, when Tracer's committing on a target with her blinks, and that kind of thing. And then, of course, for our backline members, look at Crimzo's uptime on Zen specifically. Everyone, obviously, Happy's Ashe and Crimzo Zen, both very heavy damage dealers, but everyone else is kind of just, not really just standing around, but waiting for their moment and doing whatever they can to make sure this uptime is consistent. We're not making super long rotations. We're keeping pressure up so that basically Ashe, Zen can kind of just chill and play aim labs and just shoot heads and that kind of thing. So, let's these first couple fights play out. If there's anything you guys want to go into, want to talk about, or ask questions about, I encourage you to ask me to pause and interrupt me if there's stuff that comes up. But really take a close look at your counterparts on the Houston Outlaws here and look at how well they play this space, how much they leverage their forward spacing to make sure their backline is as comfy as possible for as long as possible.
Stop the payload.
So obviously pretty standard forward position. This is basically how we would start positioning with normal double bubble anyway. But obviously a hero like Ball has guns that can shoot people, unlike Winston, who needs to be up in your face. And again, this isn't even a hard committal from Dante. This is literally just him catching Glister off guard, getting the kill, and he hasn't even committed anything besides recall at this point, and he's still not committing trying to like chase down this Winston until he sees he's got backup from Jungkook. So right off the bat, just highlighting, there's a lot more kill potential sooner from this composition. You don't need to take the time to line up a dive, to line up an nade, to make sure our Winston has cooldowns, to make sure he gets a bubble from Zarya. You can act a lot more independently as these two heroes, and then secure kills together when you see opportunities. Good opportunities presenting himself in this case, where the team is split, Winston caught off on his own, wasting his bubble cooldown. Obviously, Tracer and Ball don't care too much about bubble, they just run through it, and securing that kill. All of that made easier with the consistent poke and pressure that's coming through from both Dante Jungkook, and of course Crimzo and Happy in the backline as well. Poke is much more punishing against the standard double bubble because again, it's just one thing chipping away from that infrequent uptime window they're looking for. Again, no need for Houston here to try and go deep. They're just looking for opportunities to disrupt, and again, look how much pressure Smurf is under. He's literally just trying to push the cart and get in range to jump backline, and he was forced to jump defensively into this area, and they're even forced to use their Ana's nade just to stabilize in neutral. Outlaws haven't committed any cooldowns, basically. Recall being forced out a little bit there, a bit eager from Dante, but still not too bad. Then the moment they try to go aggressive, nice boot from Jake, denies it. Outlaws make sure, number one, again, highlighting Jungkook and Dante, as these are some of the more important characters for this composition. They're not trying to go aggressive at the same time that Smurf was jumping in. They're mainly thinking about stabilizing and counter-aggressing once these cooldowns are used. They know, again, Shock's composition has higher peaks, but this frequency that Houston's working with means that during any of this downtime, that's when they want to be hitting them like multiple times, but they need to give them a little bit of respect when they are using their cooldowns effectively. So Jungkook comes back to peel, Dante falls back, doesn't try to duel Glister at this moment, and is peeling for this monkey kill. And now, they've used their cooldowns, we go aggressive with the slam, we go aggressive with the pulse bomb, Happy even finding an aggressive angle over here, after we've already stabilized. Highlighting, obviously, really quickly, the geometry extremely favors defenders here. When you have control of all of these high ground areas, this is just the valley of death for the attackers. So the attackers are forced into areas like this, which we saw cut off the Winston. We saw that once they're committing to a jump and they're committing to pushing the payload, it's very easy for defenders to stabilize in areas like this. There's nothing threatening Piggy and Happy over here. There's a lot threatening Crimzo, but we have the peel of Jake and we have the peel of Jungkook and Dante coming back to survive in this location where Violet, Twilight, FD God, none of these people can, Choi Hyobin, none of these people can hit this spot. They're forced to stay on the ground. And we forced them to stay on the ground with consistent pressure that's been keeping them from pushing the payload, followed by consistent pressure as soon as they're looking to use their cooldowns to close the distance. Is this all making sense so far? Am I overloading people at all?
No, makes sense.
All right, perfect. Now that the cart's sort of at this choke, we can no longer really leverage these forward corners, but we still want to get as much neutral value as we can from these members. We notice Jungkook isn't again, trying to hard commit from these kind of locations. He's more looking to scout and to poke out maybe like a Winston so that he's forced to jump defensively potentially. But now that we see they're lining up for this rotation, I'm not sure why Shock opted to just go for the payload here. I'm really honestly not sure, but we saw 10 seconds earlier when they were making this rotation, they almost mirrored the positioning they had before, where we saw Piggy and over here and Ash sort of on this angle. Here, let me just Zarya, Ash. We see these members flip when the threat is coming potentially this way. So by default, the threat was coming this way. We want Zarya being the main, almost like a main tank in the situation, not quite with the stability of someone like Reinhardt, but you are the road bump in their face that they have to work through, which is giving more uptime for your Ash. If they go the other way, we flip those. Piggy's now in their face. People like Jake as well on the Brig, but a little bit less, obviously, than someone like Zarya, just to make sure Happy is, for lack of a better word, happy, and shooting as much as he wants to. But yeah, again, I'm really not sure what they expected to gain from this ground. Winston just has no jump angles from main, and they looked a little bit lost with where they wanted to go. We did force them out, we being the Houston Outlaws, and now we understand that because we committed to a play here, we no longer have the space here, so now we're setting up for a second fight zone. Basically, Dorado comes down to 2 points, comes down to this alley, and a little bit this choke, and it comes down to this fountain area. If we give up space, if we give up this like trifecta of high ground, even a little bit, it's good to have respect to the enemy team. Because again, if we try to stabilize for too long and we let them get one of their peak moments off as the general, again, they are on more of a dive now with Choi on Diva, but if we let them set up for their cooldowns, notably their Winston jump, then we're going to have a hard time stabilizing if they get the fight they want to off. So we realized, again, we being Houston, that we didn't get as much value as we wanted from this team fight we were expecting because they just backed off and took this high ground. So we give them some respect. We wait for our next opportunity to fight more in neutral. We leverage the space and the long distances we can abuse from characters like Happy's Ash and Crimzo's Zenyatta, and we just back off. We're happy taking a fight here just as much as we are here. But that isn't to say we don't start with pressure here first. It's just when we are forced to give it up, we are respecting that moment. And then, of course, pretty standard Dorado first point play here. Again, Jungkook finding an opportunity to slam here, mainly based off the fact that the enemy is split between their backline here and their front line here. There's nothing Brig or Ana can do to punish Jungkook, and he's reacting to their support positioning more than anything right now. Because realistically, the only threats to Jungkook are CC abilities, and if there's only one on cart, example Flashbang, he's fine dealing with that. If there's only Brig Bash, he's fine dealing with that. It's when you start compounding these things together that's actually a kill threat for someone like Ball. And obviously something like Sleep Dart plus Anti-Night could also be a kill threat. But neither of those things were in play since they're both up here. So, Louis, this is exactly the type of opportunity you should be looking for when playing Ball. You don't have a bubble to outplay those abilities, so you need to outplay their positioning. Other things to highlight, obviously, Jake and Crimzo have been holding hands this entire match. Happy using flexible positioning when he sees it's appropriate. In this instance, he saw Winston use his jump. He's seeing Diva use her boosters. He's going to the high ground as Ash because there's not going to be any abilities to take him down. And even with McCree on the low ground, this position is safe because this distance favors Ash, and he's still in LOS of his supports. Moving forward. An interesting thing here, actually, I'm not sure how planned this was, but the way Piggy splits off as Zarya here, the way he doesn't kite back to his team, actually makes it a lot easier for Crimzo. So again, thinking back here, we want Zarya ahead of the pack because they're forced to move through Zarya, but in this instance, when they can go over and around Zarya, we're using Piggy as a secondary threat to someone like Crimzo's Zen or Happy's Ash, in that if they focus Piggy, they try to get this kill, Crimzo's free firing on their backline. If they focus Crimzo or Happy, Piggy's free firing on their backline. This is only something you can leverage. This is primarily for you, Tin. This is only something you'll be able to leverage properly when you are high charge, when you know you have high kill threat yourself. As we're seeing, Choi Hyobin has no life bar remaining. But you can use space like this, or even space like in here, depending on how the fight's evolving, to work opposite your other damage dealers, your other backline threats, so that you get the most individual value either by pulling a lot of attention that's going to buy uptime for your backline, or baiting them into ignoring you by walking into safe space. Again, safe meaning out of main LOS range that suits you and in LOS of your supports, to then baiting them to walking, overextending basically into you so you can zap them down, or you'll have free firing on them if they focus anyone else. This whole time, by the way, stasis, Dante's basically been doing whatever he wants, but important thing is, similar to Happy respecting the tank boosters and the jump before going up here, Dante is not committing before he has a good read on the fight and good read on someone he can punish. And that can come from communication, hearing that the enemy team is committing somewhere, that's an opportunity to go in, or seeing, based on enemy position, similar to what we said about Janggu's ball, he knows this rotation is coming through. He sees people already commit past the choke, then he hits the slam. If he goes in when they're still back here about to make the move, then he gets CC'd. Same thing applies to Tracer. If you go too quickly, you get CC'd, you get burned down.
So how much of a priority are like, is Tracer supposed to be putting on tanks as opposed to squishies? Because like with double bubble, like you tend to poke the tanks a lot more, right? Rather than trying to poke the backline or like a squishy or whatever. So like how often?
In the neutral fight, you usually won't have a lot of options, which is why you see a lot of pressure on tanks. And what's cool about this composition actually is, compared to Ana, Zarya, McCree, we have more tank damage. We may not have as much burst damage from something like a flashbang. We might not have as much cohesion with like a nano and stuff like that. But across the board, generally, we'll be putting more damage out into their tanks than they will into ours, because Janggu can play a lot more flexibly, and we have Discord Orb.
Right.
So in the neutral fight, we saw Dante playing around here, looking to punish the Winston, looking to punish people setting up for the dive, but he's not like going aggressive onto someone like Zarya or backline here, because that's not his space. The only time Dante's even going to realistically have a chance to fight anyone besides tanks or Glister is during these sort of evolved team fights, during a situation like this, where they're already past their main aggressive moment. So looking at this pulse bomb, you can see Dante's here, we'll go to his POV. Oh my god, he's in hyperspace. He's not looking to assassinate anyone right now. This technically could be an opportunity to get on someone like Ana, right? But because he knows his team wasn't being aggressive, he knows his team wasn't setting up for an aggressive movement at this time, we're still sort of in neutral. We're still playing to absorb any enemy aggression, this time in the form of their primal. And then when he sees an opportunity, now he goes aggressive because he's seen his team stabilize. He knows there's nothing he can do to really support this anymore, and he's finding an opportunity. And obviously, in this instance, he has Pulse Bomb. So if you didn't have Pulse Bomb this instant, maybe you try something like blinking over here and getting a flank on the McCree. But basically, from this position, you started as Tracer trying to mark tanks to deny their aggression as much as possible. Now that they've already committed their aggression, and they use that like primal to make sure it goes through. They used a nano on this Brig even, probably meant for Smurf, to be honest, to make their aggression work. The pre-fight, the neutral fight is basically over at this point. Now you can look for an aggressive opportunity, because Shock's game plan is already quite clear. So now we get to hit them. But similar to what I mentioned over here with Janggu's slam during that rotation, the fact that they were already past this door meant that he can split these backline members. If he had done this before they start rolling out, if they're like still right here, all 6 of them, none of them had hard committed to this rotation, he likely would only try to roll through at most. It's not until he's seen some level of commitment, in this case crossing a choke, before he hits the slam. Same goes for Tracer if you're up here. Until you see their tanks commit, ideally even commit something like cooldowns, then you can start looking for aggression yourself. But up until that point, you're making their Winston's life hell, basically. You're making their Tracer's life hell, because you're marking, you're getting interface, and you're using your Brig Pack, you're using your Zen Orb in your favor in those duels. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So yeah, default tanks, once they've committed, once they're out of your reach, then you can do whatever you want. It helps if you're one of the best Tracer players in the world in Dante, and you've got a really good team around you that helps support that kind of playstyle. But a lot of this Tracer playstyle, as well as the ball playstyle, is very independent play. You're going to be playing the same regardless of what your team is doing. You're more reacting to what the enemy is doing, so your own information that both of you can get and share with each other is going to be very, very important. And then, yeah, not too much to say. This is basically the end of the defense.
10 seconds.
Okay, as like as the backline, like what kind of things should we be calling out and looking for then?
Biggest thing is going to be movements. So between Crimzo, Jake, and Happy, notice like right now they're joined at the hip, and then we saw moments where Happy would try to spring off here, try to get a flank aggression here. Happy's thinking very similarly to Dante in those situations where before they've committed everything, he needs the support of his backline, which means you guys need to be talking about movements, what kind of space you're holding, as well as opportunities any of you see to go aggressive. So, for example, going back to first point, if we're all chilling here, all three of those backline members, and then we force that Winston jump defensively here, that's an opportunity for Happy to step up and look for more damage. Granted, there wasn't much here, but he could even like potentially drop down if he's got Coach Gun, look for a big dynamite, then Coach Gun back up, because he'll have his positioning back by the time their jump is back, and he can look for more forward pressure, which might result in kills or engage opportunities. For someone
Can you show me where he dropped again?
He didn't actually drop like that, but
there
was moments where he'd be like flanking over here, where his Zen would be over here. And here we can go back to that. Before this. So yeah, they start the fight, joined at the hip. Now that Monkey's jump is down, this is an opportunity for Happy to look to get more aggressive. We see him flanking over here now. By the time the second jumps up, he's already counter-rotated. And now he's looking for damage on backline when he gets a chance.
Okay.
It's pretty subtle, to be honest. But like the fact that he now has this angle after they've already committed stuff like their Winston, and obviously Winston dying definitely helps, means that he doesn't need to play with Zen and Brig anymore. And even in an instance like this, someone like Brig could be following up aggressively and going to like bash Choi Hyobin in the face kind of thing. And that applies to all three of you. You start together, you start stacked on top of each other, because that's how, when you're strongest, that's when you need to be ready to absorb their spike, their power spike, basically. But then as soon as that moment passes, as soon as they use those cooldowns, they quickly taper off. And then until their next set of cooldowns is available, you need to push as much of that advantage as possible to drain even more recesses out of them and stall their next peak as long as possible. So for example, Monkey jumped up, he got bubble, but he got booped back. That's their peak instantly over. They no longer have an opportunity. And they're going to be slowly regaining their resources, but if you do things like poke Winston's HP halfway down, that's before they hit their peak. If we force Zarya to use bubbles, they're not able to hit their peak. It's going to be a long time before they're actually able to set up again. So it's going to be up to you guys, again, all three of you, to gauge where their power and where their reach is at. Like how high on the meters, basically, are they ready to go? And then when they are about to hit their peak, that's when we're stacking safely together, and that's when we need to think about giving up space potentially. Does that make sense? It's a high skill ceiling. It's not easy, but this is a glimpse into Happy's mindset when he's doing this. And again, a lot of this comes down to intuition for these kind of players. To be honest, they get a read on the situation. They know what it feels like to be at advantage in these kind of states, and they naturally react by taking more space aggressively. And we're not worried about Crimzo dying because there's Winston's already been burned. We're not worried about Happy dying because there's no one at this moment who can get on it. These kind of things.